So without further ado, I'll pass on to our last paper, which is by Wanderley, Corino, Nunes, Filho, who's a doctoral student at the University of São Paulo, and who's working on the poetry of Orides Fontela. Wanderley, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thanks everyone for taking the time to participate in this meeting. So I'm going to share with you a screen. Can you see that?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, it's the title of this presentation is Orides Fontela and Erring as a Pensive Poetic Form in Brazilian Modern Poetry. I'm going to read my speech because I think it would be easier to control the time, okay? Considered one of the most important voices of the Brazilian poetry and the most recent Brazilian poetry, Orides Fontela was a student of philosophy course at the University of São Paulo. And this is important to mention because her work has lots of influence of poetry, of philosophy. And her poetic work is composed of 5 books: Transposição, Elianto, Alba, Rosácea, and Teia. For today, I'm going to concentrate on 2 poems from the book Rosácea. Orides Fontela appropriates the commonplaces of language by revitalizing the word that is so worn out by the current use. This is possible given to the focused attention with which the poet turns to the language. Lucidity may be the most recurring word for her critical fortune, and it's not difficult to understand why. As it is stated in a poem called Fala, or Speech, which is probably her most famous poem, the subject constantly deals with the too much consciousness of being, which is a quotation from the poem that is Consciência demais do ser. Such consciousness expresses the difficulty imposed by the existence, while in parallel with the difficulty that is to deal with words. Even though most studies focus on identifying both impasses as one, I believe that that is not an advance by itself enough. It is worth asking more than that, how do they present in the making of the poem? By saying that, what I mean is we could go further by asking what kind of concerns are mobilized by this sharp consciousness. So Jean Baudrillard coined the term hegemonic image to identify the simulacrum of artistic procedures and images in the mass culture. Baudrillard states that such simulacrum creates flat images, no puzzles, no mystery, an image without hidden face. In contrast to that, there is what he calls a surviving image, which is the one that transgresses the conventionality of the simulacrum. This kind of image would propose a break from the horizon, as it would go against the already known destination. In that sense, I intend to evaluate whether this puzzle picture could be found at Orides Fontela's works as an image that forces thinking. For that, I shall present poems embedded with negativity, to which I refer as the notion of erring. So we're going to take a look at one of the poems that I selected, which is called Errância, or Erring. Só porque erro, encontro o que não se procura. Só porque erro, invento o labirinto. A busca, a coisa, a causa da procura. Só porque erro, acerto, me construo. Margem de erro, margem de liberdade. It would be something like in English, only because I err, I find what is not looked for. Only because I err, I invent the labyrinth, the search, the thing, the cause of the search. Only because I err, I build myself. I get right. Margin of error, margin of liberty. So as you can see, the notion of error is described as a force that triggers the other actions throughout the stanzas. Due to this cause and effect relationship, the subject can find in the first stanza, invent in the second stanza, and get right in the fourth stanza, only after being subjected to the error. So if we consider the formative aspects that the error plays in the first stanza, it is interesting to verify how it appears in the rest of the poem. For instance, in the second stanza, the image of the labyrinth is represented in a peculiar way. Its routes do not exist a prioristically. The logic is subverted as in fact, it is the subject who constructs their own path through the making of the error. Such change of perspective allows for an autonomy to the subject. As the poem reintroduced the parallel structure in the fourth stanza, which is só porque erro, this may be described as something constructive, the error. Even though this repetition may allude to the axiom to err is human, to persist in err is diabolical, what we find in the poem is a less harmful connotation. The error ceases to be depicted as something unfavorable since it allows the subject to face the freedom of the new path. So what we have here is a signal inversion, and this is synthesized in the last stanza. A margin of error, margin of liberty. And this signal inversion happens given to the subject's need to leave the center, so it goes to the margin, and to bet on the error as a possibility of autonomy, marginal liberty, by occupying the space on the margin. In other words, it is through a kind of imperfection aesthetic that the subject can resist the map. I also want to shed light on the verbs in the first person singular. Erro, encontro, invento, acerto e construo, as they indicate a gradual succession of actions from the chaos to the order, constituting the complementary extremes of the same process. This sharp awareness permeates the poem and expands the semantic field of the term erring that gives name to the poem. We see that the four occurrences of the word erro or erro in the poem, the first three are inflections of the verb to err, and having as a synonym the action of wandering. Only the last occurrence is a noun per se. Interestingly, the poem plays with Portuguese homograph erro, erro, but on a serious note, as it transformed the contingency into autonomy, which is described by Jean Baudrillard again as a pensive quality of the image. So the notion of the error is not limited to the poem's ethical plan. Errância is a brief poem structured in 3 verses. It has also light punctuation, and an abundance of enjambement. All those elements combined allows for a rhythm marking when read aloud that counteracts the fracture presented by the graphic arrangement of the poem. In other words, there is a mismatch between the visual and the acoustic dimensions of the poem. Such a disjunction organizes a broken symmetry that resonates as a positive quality of the erring. The poem defends an idea that does not confuse the finity of possibilities with resignation of the status quo, and an idea that does not confuse choice with determinism. Such notions as chance and probability are dear to Orides Fontela's poetics. They find echo in the definition of existentialism proposed by Nicola Abbagnano, who describes it as a philosophy capable of highlighting the disconcerting aspects of the human existence as well as its instabilities. In Orides' poems, such uncertainties are thematized with deep analytical reflection. So bearing that all in mind, I invite you to read another poem from the book Rosácea that dialogues with the notion of erring. A poem called Viagem. Viajar, mas não para. Viajar, mas sem onde. Sem rota, sem ciclo, sem círculo. Sem finalidade possível. Viajar e nem sequer sonhar-se esta viagem. It would be something like in English, traveling but nowhere to. Traveling but without destination, without route, without cycle, without circle, without any possible finality. Traveling and without dreaming this trip. So one aspect that catches our attention is the repeated denial that becomes structure to the poem. As we can observe, the words não, sem, and nem, meaning no, not, and neither, respectively, are mobilized not to deny the journey itself, but to qualify the journey. The idea of traveling, viajar, is shaped by the comments that are introduced after those negatives, as they specify what can and what cannot be found from such a journey. In the first two stanzas, we can observe the notion that the route is more important than the destination, an aspect that is detailed in the third stanza. Although there is no repetition of the verb travel, as we see in the other stanzas, the verses 7 and 8 present parallelism due to the four occurrences of the term sem, neither nor. Sem rota, sem ciclo, sem círculo, sem finalidade possível. The insistence of this word relates to the subject's position, as they refuse to go through paths already traveled before. Apart from that, it is important to mention the vehemence without the subject, it is important to mention the vehemence with which the subject rejects such closed and self-absorbed routes, sem ciclo and sem círculo, without cycle and without circle, since that kind of route does not offer any openness to create their own path. In a nutshell, the aesthetic meets the ethical, due to the fact that the making of the poem embodies its theme, which is nothing more than the refusal for answers, and the refusal for ready-made solutions, and the refusal of beaten tracks, as the subject opts to the absence of a programmed direction without route, sem rota, as pointed out in the poem Viagem, which can be also translated as a margin of error margin of freedom, which closes the poem Errância. So thank you guys. It was pretty much that. I tried to cut shorter because I didn't want to go off topic, but that's it.